Caller, Vaush is calling anti-trans bills genocide from the David Pakman Show. That is true. I do say this. What's up?
Next to Casey from Kansas. Casey from Kansas, welcome to the program. Let's hope and pray for no technical issues. Casey, welcome. You're on. Oh, dear. Casey, the most likely problem is you've selected an audio device that's not valid on your computer.
That's true.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, you can? Sorry, it took me a second.
What's going on?
I had a question relating to something that's been asked in a few of the communities I'm in recently.
Okay.
Mainly the Vaush or Vaush community, as some
Ian
would call
Vaush,
it.
of course.
Yes, Ian Vaush. But would you consider the legislation and the rhetoric from the GOP targeting trans people to be a genocide in any sense of the word?
Okay, so just really quickly, because people keep playing this semantic game, I want to make it clear that as a linguistic descriptivist, okay, I really don't care that much about the idea of like the sanctity of a definition. The problem that I have here is that it seems like the term concentration camp, this is something that you can use to refer to an incredibly wide range of actions. And if you abide by some definitions, it makes sense. And if you abide by some colloquial definitions, it doesn't. So, for instance, the border camps that Trump maintained, and let's be fair, to an extent, Biden maintains still, to a lesser extent, but yeah, still, meet the definition of a concentration camp with like detainment and like political purposes and the whole thing, you know? It meets, and Obama, yes, and going a while back, it meets the definition of a concentration camp. But when I said that, like 2-3 years ago when this was active, ongoing discourse, there were a lot of conservatives who were like, well, no, a concentration camp is like Auschwitz. It's like a death camp. And it's, okay, we do tend to call Auschwitz a concentration camp, but the main thing that made Auschwitz significant was that it was a death camp. Concentration camps are not actually that uncommon the world around, unfortunately. Death camps are. Thankfully, they're a lot rarer. So a concentration camp is like it's a broader term. I mean, we did them back in World War II with the Japanese internment camps. Those were undeniably concentration camps. Here, if we just, hold on. Concentration camp definition. That's how we go. We go to the Google definition, like all wise political YouTubers. A place where large numbers of people, especially political prisoners or members of persecuted minorities, are deliberately imprisoned in a relatively small area with inadequate facilities, sometimes to provide forced labor or await mass execution. The term is most strongly associated with Nazi Germany, so on and so forth. It says sometimes to provide forced labor or await mass execution, but if all you're getting from this is a place where large numbers of people, especially political prisoners or members of persecuted minorities, are deliberately imprisoned in a small area with inadequate facilities, that would describe, like, a lot of places, you know? That it's not that uncommon. It's really only one step further along than a regular American prison, to be honest. The Uyghur Muslims in China? Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. 100%. Yeah. Anyway, so the point here being, like, if your definition of genocide is, like, killing them all, then, like, yeah, obviously that hasn't happened yet. But there are definitions of genocide that involve, like, the absolute social exclusion of a group or an effort to bring about conditions unlivable in nature for a group of people. And I think the reason a lot of people don't like to think about that is because they don't like thinking about genocide as an unexceptional thing. And what I mean by that is, by this definition, Reagan failing to address the AIDS crisis back in the 80s, unquestionably a genocidal act on his part. Literally, like, let's let this disease ravage the gay population because they're being punished by God for their degeneracy, and we're just going to abet and aid that death, you know? That's pretty unambiguously, you know, I don't know how you could argue that isn't true. I just think a lot of people don't like to think of it that way. I think a lot of people like to think it's like, okay, genocide is when Holocaust, concentration camp is when Holocaust, everything is when Holocaust. Vaush, so it's more semantically correct to say lead up to a genocide, but more rhetorically effective to just say genocide? Well, if genocide begins, like, the moment people start, like, getting shot, then we aren't currently in a genocide. If you could say, like, this overwhelming push from Republicans all across the country, this unprecedented wave of anti-trans legislation, which is absolutely an effort to just remove them from society. Like, that process is genocidal. That would be what I would say. Like, in this case, we're dealing with like a legalistic second-class citizen kind of genocide, where the goal is to use like legal separation and legal distinction to bring about unlivable conditions for a group of people. And in that sense, I would say that the laws that are currently being fought for by the GOP are genocidal. But again, like, you notice how little information we're getting out of actually debating the semantics here. I would be much more interested in saying, like, yeah, these are genocidal laws. And it's like, okay, well, why are they genocidal laws? Because they're looking to bring about the unlivable conditions, and so on and so forth. You know, look at this, look at that, da-da-da. And then you, like, move from there. But if we acknowledge that genocide has, like, a ton of different definitions, then obviously there's room for disagreement on the specific use case. It seems like a lot of people just in bad faith want to, like, banty it about. Anyway, sorry, I'm just pausing here. The caller's maybe not acting in bad faith. I don't know anything about the caller, so.
You know, these things are so fraught because you can contrive and fabricate some interpretation of so many things where you could match it up with a number of different words, like, for example, genocide. Speaking colloquially, and I know, Casey, you're not trying to gotcha me, right? Just like speaking colloquially, I don't think that those are the right words that I would apply to the anti-trans legislation. Now, can I imagine how someone might make that connection? Can I propose to you how I would do it if I wanted to make that case? You tell me if this is what's being said. Casey? Hello?
Damn, he blew that guy the fuck out. Holy shit.
Hi.
Okay. Can you hear me, Casey?
Yeah, a little bit. I was having a little bit of trouble.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I can hear you.
If I had to make the case that anti-trans legislation is genocide, I would say something like the following. Trans folks have a high rate of suicide attempting and suicidal ideation. And when you pass anti-trans bills that make it more difficult for them to avail themselves of the medical or other services that may help them, you increase the odds that they will attempt suicide. And thus one could argue that those bills are, in a sense, a genocide. Is that like roughly the way one would do it? Is that how you...
I actually disagree with that line. For me, actually, the root of it would be in bathroom bills. That was where this all started, and I think that might have been, like, where this is going. Like, that's kind of the end point, right? So, the bathroom bills, like the whole, you have to use your biological bathroom, use your biological porcelain toilet bowl or whatever. The idea there, I think, is actually one of the most sort of fundamentally genocidal, because it completely precludes trans people from existing in a public space. Most bathrooms are gender separated publicly, meaning that if you introduce legislation that could lead to them being arrested if they use the restroom they want to use, but then you whip up a big, like, anti-trans moral panic that increases the likelihood of them being assaulted if they use the bathroom the state says they should use. The truth is that they're just not going to use public restrooms. And that sounds like a trivial thing, but, and I understand this may come across as a bit hyperbolic, but I fully mean it. We have to understand how much, like, removal from public faculties was a component of Jim Crow era segregation. There's a lot of weight socially to going, like, okay, these institutions, these banal, everyday, ordinary human institutions that everyone else takes for granted, you don't get to use them. Not just because it's circumstantially difficult, the way it might be for, say, a disabled person, where there's just maybe some physical difficulty in using them. That's unfortunate, but it's also kind of a component of the disability. No, in this case, the state is deliberately, for no reason, removing them from that space. And to my mind, that just reminds me more of the logic behind segregation. I mean, not to mention, we've talked about this on stream. You guys have been seeing this, right? Like DeSantis, like threatening to arrest teachers who have gender ideology in their classrooms, whether it be in books in the library or in the classroom or anything that's said, opening up teachers to being like scrutinized by insane boomer right-wing parents if ever they say anything remotely progressive on gender or sexual issues. Like the laws recently to ban, I forget which state, to ban drag performances, to put them in the same category as like pornography. Obviously, when Republicans draft this legislation, it's not really just targeted at drag, Oklahoma. It's targeted at any kind of like gender divergent behavior. Keep in mind, it wasn't that long ago that in, say, New York City, the police could arrest you for deviance if you were wearing 3 articles of clothing that, quote, didn't belong to your gender. So if you can, so we have precedent for this stuff, Now, technically, that law doesn't mention trans people, right? Like that like 100-year-old law or whatever. It doesn't say like, yeah, if you're trans, we'll arrest you. But 3 articles of clothing that are the other gender. Like, we know what this actually means, don't we? We're not dumb. I would consider what I'm talking about here, considering the fact that it's part of a deliberate state-orchestrated effort to specifically target one minority group, I can comfortably call that a genocide. I'm okay with it. Like, I think I can defend that just fine. Because the definition, again, can include, like, an effort to bring about, in whole or in part, like an unlivable an unlivable state of affairs to make life just unlivably difficult for a group of people. I mean, Donald Trump was literally just saying federally ban all trans healthcare and all gender ideology, or ban all federal association with it, meaning that like all hospitals and like Medicare, Medicaid, all that stuff. I mean, clearly the effort here is to make life unlivably bad for trans people. So that would be my argument. Would Jim Crow laws against black people in the 1960s be qualified as a genocide? I think you can make that argument, but I don't necessarily think so. I would go to a different term, because the point of the Jim Crow laws wasn't to remove them from society. It was to distinguish and separate them. We're not talking about like segregation for trans people. We're talking about eradication of trans people. The effort, like the broad effort of the Jim Crow laws, was to maintain the presence of black people, because not to say there weren't people who didn't just want to wipe them out. There certainly were plenty of genocidal intent going on in the history of Jim Crow. But the Jim Crow laws in and of themselves seem more like an effort to maintain apartheid conditions, which seems less to do with like making life unlivably bad and more like stay in your lane, keep in your place. That's not to say that what happened there was any better. The term genocide is often used as a kind of like rhetorical bludgeon that feels like it has the highest possible, like the highest imaginable weight. I just think they refer to like different social trends, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, the effort to like the entire process of like the transatlantic slave trade, unquestionably a cultural genocide, because they literally like eradicated the culture of the African tribes they were brought in from. Obviously, their goal was not to eradicate black people, because they kept bringing more in. But their goal was like a lot worse than what is currently happening to trans people, right? Like, I wouldn't say necessarily the transatlantic slave trade was an attempt at genocide, except for the cultural sense. But I would say the transatlantic slave trade was far worse than what's happening now with trans people. So it's like, I think these terms have a lot more like play, if that makes any sense. There's more like give definitionally. But we're just arguing semantics at this point. I just think I mean, what's important is focusing on what's actually happening, and not broad terms to describe it. I'm sorry, I'm totally rambling.
Yeah, but also just like I don't know if you could use like the term legislative genocide, or like let's say like there was a recent bill that was proposed that would make it where you can't do like transitional health care even if you're 26 or under.
I was proposed.
Which is not even 18. Like, would that be like genocide at all, or would
Listen,
you just use a different word?
This is, it doesn't seem to me that the word genocide is neither accurate in its spirit nor productive. But of course, I can see how somebody might make a semantic argument of that kind. It's not really the way I kind of think about these issues, I think, is where I would leave it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you at least think it's like a dangerous warning sign, at least?
Yes, and also like when a government.
I don't think that Deepak is doing anything wrong here. If I have to say, I think there's enough like play in these words that we probably shouldn't focus like hyper specifically on which broad, like kind of unhelpfully distinguished definition we want to use. Like Deepak would agree on like basically everything this community says on trans people. Except for that trans people are annoying on Twitter. I don't know if he'd be willing to commit to that position, but I'm just very consistent and moral, and that's why I say it. Deepak's usually pretty based about this kind of stuff. Oh, no, for sure. Yeah, no. I like Deepak.